It is nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Just can you tell us a little bit about yourself to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing Bitcoin and blockchain basically since I've been in the workforce. I started out in around 2012. Actually started using some school computers for Bitcoin mining to try it out. Made a little money that way, and then started going to more meetups here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and then eventually kind of became a general purpose cryptocurrency consultant. Did that for many years, a mix of security setups, trading, just general device consultancy, helping people have secure keys, that sort of thing. And then over time, I learned smart contract development, so I got very involved, especially around 2017, 2018, in helping projects that were building on Ethereum.
Big boom then.
Yes, definitely. So some token launches, among other things, and then I also did several stints at kind of like corporate consulting, so I worked with Thomson Reuters on tax use cases, worked with Verizon on claims management, worked with Toyota on supply chain, so kind of a mix of everything. I got to see how corporations are using blockchain, sometimes not always in the most effective ways. This is when private blockchains are very popular.
Can you actually touch on that?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned Toyota and Verizon. How are they using blockchain?
A variety of different ways. This were definitely like experimental, but they were, in the case of Toyota, they were very interested in the ability to track car parts across their entire supply chain. So for example, car frames coming from Mexico into the United States. So for example, like, you know, remember the like airbag scandal where they had to track down faulty airbags? Very difficult to figure out, like, okay, where did the parts that were faulty come from? How did they get into the cars, and which cars now have them? Usually recalls are usually like a, what do you call it? They recall a wide variety of vehicles, but only a minority.
They don't know. Right.
Exactly. So they were trying to get more accurate, be able to track down to the VIN number where it came from, and they were thinking that NFTs and tokenizing them would be a way to kind of do it, because their own data systems were kind of struggling to keep up. There's a lot of third parties involved, so there's a belief that blockchain can help, and I think it can. That experiment didn't go too much further than kind of initial MVP proof of concept that we presented to the CIO. But I think the problem is that setting these blockchains up, like private blockchains, can be difficult for corporations, and when you're trying to get other parties involved,
I think
the governance is very difficult.
That's the biggest thing, right? Just trying to get, you know, supplier A, supplier B, Toyota, manufacturer. Yeah. We want to implement this, but you guys don't. These guys do. So, you know, how do they? Because I always thought that was a great idea. We actually tried to, like our parent company, XY Labs, we actually pitched it to a shipping company. Instead of having, you know, when you get a shipping manifest, it's like EA fit, right? So why would you not have blockchain? You have QR code, you scan it over the border of entry, and the whole thing, freaking, the whole manifest comes up on the computer.
Yeah.
Easily search for everything.
Well, and there's also the privacy concerns, which data is whose, and so, yeah, in the end, I think that is a useful use case, and I think we'll continue to see that evolve, but I think it's going to take longer than a lot of people initially anticipated. But after that, I actually got involved with Texas Blockchain Council, helping them set up their initial operations and continue to sit on the board. And then around that same time, 2021, is when I joined OpenZepplin as a project manager for their security team. So we did security audits for a wide array of protocols: Compound, Aave, MakerDAO. We worked directly with the Ethereum Foundation on a few projects like account extraction, several ZK rollups as our clients as well. So I've gotten to see the guts of nearly every protocol, and I usually act in a kind of security advisory capacity. I both work with our auditing team, who do a lot of the on-the-ground security work, and then I kind of try to figure out what can we do to advise a client on a high level, like what could they be doing on their strategy to improve security, our snapshot check of their code, because we've learned that, like, we can look at the code today and it's secure, but it changes over time, and that's where bugs can still be introduced. So there needs to be a more holistic solution. Yep.
You mentioned the Texas Blockchain Foundation.
Council.
Okay. How did that come about? Like, where is Texas? Like, I know New York's been big in the blockchain space. I didn't know that Texas wasn't. That was actually a couple of years ago. So how did that all come about?
A variety of things. Really, it was definitely a great show with Lee, who's still the president, but he brought me and a lot of early folks in around, I think it was also in 2021 or 2020. But basically, there's a few ratings out there of, like, what are the good blockchain-friendly states, and Texas wasn't ranking well, maybe because it either hadn't been addressed or there have been kind of like I think it was difficult to get crypto licenses for exchanges, or crypto exchange, the AML licenses required for exchanges here. And there were a lot of Bitcoin miners coming to Texas on their own because of the electric grid, because there was a lot of other good prospects, like the mining facility at Rockdale and others. So there was an understanding that we have a great opportunity to be a hub, but we need to make sure that the regulations don't push out the industry as they had in so many other places up to this
New
point.
York for one, right?
Exactly. So Lee had built some really good connections with policymakers in Texas, and basically formed an organization to be able to speak on behalf of the industry here, especially Bitcoin miners, but also a lot of others. OpenZepplin is one of them. A lot of other software shops, people that are either working in Bitcoin or other blockchains. And the idea was just to be able to say to policymakers, this is what is holding back innovation in Texas, as well as just to send a signal and be able to pass legislation that even if the impact is minimal at first, it really sets a message for, hey, this is a place where the regulators will work with the industry as opposed to fighting them. And I say not impactful when we have made very impactful legislation, but even the things like, for example, one of our first legislative efforts was a blockchain working group. We just said, let's bring in people from industry, let's bring in people from the government. They sat down and came up with a lot of recommendations that formed the basis for a lot of other legislative initiatives that we started to work on from there on.
And Lee is
President of the Texas Blockchain Council.
his last name?
Bratcher. Yep, Lee Bratcher. So yeah, he's definitely, he's been the powerhouse, but we've also like had a mix of different important folks working with it. Core Scientific, the chair of the board right now is Haynes, who works with them on their power work. So she's been good leadership to have, and then I have a variety of other Bitcoin miners, power providers, and then tax accounting, lawyers, folks working currently at Block who are in the policy circle. So we've got a good variety of people on the board, and then all the way down in terms of our staff and the members that we just coordinate with when it comes to showing up to Austin, testifying in front of the House and Senate, and on occasion just, you know, for example, taking policymakers on tours with Bitcoin mining, showing that this is a real industry. It's not just funny money in the air. There are real impacts it's making in Texas, and there's real jobs being created, and tax dollars rolling in. So it suddenly it perks up the
Well, it
ratings.
must be working because if you walk through that convention site today, it's all full of Bitcoin miners.
Oh yeah, yep. And we've also learned that even though there are a lot of really good organizations working at the federal level, like Coin Center and Blockchain Association, Digital Chamber of Commerce, which we've all formed connections with, we've learned that you know, state representatives or state policymakers talk to federal policymakers like Ted Cruz or other folks in the U.S. Congress, and we found that it was really effective by showing how much impact it can make at the state level. It gets the federal policymakers to also stand up and listen, and that's, I think, where we've had a lot of success working with folks pushing for federal legislation, which is a much tougher.
Yeah, because it always seems
problem.
like the federal, they hear blockchain and cryptocurrency, and they're like, we're gonna lose control.
Yes.
Kind of, right?
Well, yeah, it's been a mix of not understanding it and then also seeing, you know, reports like, you know, the latest scare was, oh, Hamas was using it for crypto, for fundraising, which was disproven a lot by Nick Carter and other people on Twitter, but, and was very embarrassing for folks like Elizabeth Warren, but that sort of thing we learned, there has to be an active voice pushing back on that. We do that in Texas as well, when people go after Bitcoin miners or others for what they perceive as bad.
When you start talking about bad actors like that, they're always gonna find a way. So
Yes.
whether it's the US dollar, which it has been for many years, right? Because it is an international currency.
Yep.
So, you know, now it's like, oh my God, cryptocurrency. So everybody's like, it's bad because bad guys are using it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as they are with every other financial institution.
Right.
But what's the what's really interesting, I think, right now is there was a good talk by Nick Carter at Token 2029 about this, but I've seen it myself with the work I do with clients like banks that are actually creating their own stablecoins. As we're seeing a merging of financial institutions and these technologies, where I think we're going to see it become more established, and I think we're also going to see the dollar actually potentially be strengthened by the technology, because stable coins allow people to get access to dollar-like instruments that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. Like the euro dollar is kind of an ancient example of this. Well, I say ancient, but like back in the 50s to 70s it started to come out.
Right.
The federal government was unhappy. They were like, oh, they're, you know, essentially it was like initially created for the Soviets to be able to hold dollars and not have the US government come after them. But then eventually they realized that it actually increased the influence of the dollar on the world stage. And eventually you actually saw the Federal Reserve open up credit lines to banks that were supporting euro dollars, and kind of unofficially recognize it as something that was important to support. And I think we'll likely see the same thing happen with stable coins and other kind of dollar derivatives that are on blockchains that are far more accessible. We actually, I know folks in Argentina who work with me at OpenZepplin that actually use stable coins exclusively because it gives them so much protection from the inflation they're experiencing.
Which is insane right now, right? Like 143%, I think I saw.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's brutal.
Yeah. So are you familiar with what Bahamas is doing, right? The same dollar?
I've heard some mentions of that, but I haven't gotten a chance to check it out.
Yeah, so that's one of the projects. Actually, I have a friend of mine that's heavily involved in that.
That is, yeah. Yeah,
They've been working on that for quite a while now.
yeah, and I think the real danger we have in the U.S. of dragging our feet on this too long is that those jurisdictions continue to be where a lot of these stablecoins and just general innovation goes and doesn't stay in the U.S. And candidly, if U.S. policymakers want to have an influence on the space in the name of consumer protection, it's more important than ever that they are welcoming, at least to the degree that they are supporting the industry while still suggesting ways to protect consumers, because I think there's still work to be done there. But pushing them entirely just means that those other jurisdictions will be the ones determining the path for those industries, and they will be left behind, and the citizens will probably either be going through VPNs or being entirely locked out of that financial system until eventually, I'm sure, the dam will break and there will eventually be access given to everyone. But at that point, U.S. policymakers will no longer be the leaders.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's so interesting how much the government wants to push back against something that can open up so many doors for everybody, right? Like, not just in the U.S. or Canada or North America, like third world countries, right? Like you said, with Venezuela and Argentina having high inflation rates.
Well, and the trick is, it's not even, it's not one entity. We've seen that the policymakers, at the SEC versus the CFTC have very different views on how to regulate space and very different scopes in mind in terms of where they can regulate. There's a bit of overlap in some of their minds.
Yeah.
But we've actually, overall, I think we've seen some pretty positive education happening in a lot of these agencies. The SEC has obviously been a challenge right now with the current leadership, but other agencies, I think, have actually started to become more supportive, even if quietly, in terms of how they're trying to approach it.
Do you think with the SEC losing that lawsuit with Ripple, will kind of change their viewpoint on how?
I don't know. At this point, my candid opinion on Gary is that I think he's basically approaching this as oppose at all costs for whatever reason. I honestly can't speculate on why, but
he staked his whole reputation on opposing this.
yes, there's for some reason that's a strategy, even if it means actually undermining the SEC's credibility, which I think he definitely has. But I do think that it has restricted what the SEC can do going forward, and I think whoever takes over chairmanship next will probably actually find themselves in a diminished position to regulate cryptocurrency as a result. And I do think that once we have regulatory clarity to a better degree, I think it's hopefully going to set up the industry to feel more protected in the end because of the precedents it will set to ensure the SEC can't go too far again.
Yeah. Well, that kind of being protected kind of leads into OpenZepplin in security, right?
Oh yeah.
Do you want to just shed some light on how that all came to be, where it started from, where it's going?
Well, the story actually starts in Argentina. So the company before my time was founded there by basically some Argentinians who were known to be good hackers. They brought that company together to work on a variety of different applications and eventually settled on Ethereum. And their big claim to fame is they actually built a library called the OpenZepplin Contract Library. And that was a library that allowed you to create your own ERC-20 or 721 tokens, or just basically tokens on Ethereum, quickly and easily without having to write most of your own code, which avoids a lot of potential bugs by having people rewrite the same code. So we became the standard library for Ethereum applications, basically 100% usage among all the top DeFi and blockchain protocols using Ethereum. You name it. Even big banks, I even saw a CBDC project that was using us. So it's everywhere, and then from there we began offering security services, doing security audits of projects, and that's where we were like, okay, use our library, well, you need to still build your own stuff on top of that, let's make sure it's secure, giving them advice, publishing reports, and then we've also branched out into building security products, such as Defender, which does security operations and monitoring. So we do a wide variety of things. My focus specifically has been on working with our biggest clients, such as Compound DAO, which has been interesting. Having a DAO as a client requires us to occasionally have them vote on paying us. But also they don't have a dedicated security resource outside of the original protocol team, so we've also taken on ownership to kind of provide guidance for the community, set up standards, and in some cases even help to respond to security incidents as they happen, which luckily have been far and few between since we started, outside of a couple examples. But overall, we've been happy. No protocol funds lost since we started.
Right. So we actually wrote a story about this last year, specifically targeting how much was lost in DeFi protocol hacks. 2021 was 14 billion. 2022 was 2.3 2 billion, but I think that was in September, so the year hadn't closed. And it was like the Ronin network topped it with a $620 million loss, right? Now, I'm assuming they didn't use you guys. No. So, what would you have been able to, with the Defender program, been able to stop that hack? Or is that something,
Yeah, I think in those cases, I mean, there's a variety of things that could be done better. I'd say security is always reducing risk, never eliminating it in practice. But I think what could have been done better in that case was more security views and then also a better focus on essentially the response. Like I think in a lot of these cases when there's an exploit, the team can sometimes take a little too long to respond because they don't have automatic processes in place. So I think monitoring that immediately detects a hack, and then even ways to immediately pause or cut off the funds. Like for cross-chain bridges, they rely a lot on a few operators that hold these keys to maintain them, or there's a very complex mechanism in place to
cross-chain that's the most vulnerable spot.
Absolutely.
Attacker can get into.
Yeah, because you're not relying solely on smart contracts. You do have to have like some off-chain infrastructure that is relaying messages, that is approving the messages as legitimate. So either by disclosing those keys or going after the infrastructure, or finding something in just the complexity that's required to make it work as a bug, it just opens up a lot of potential. Kind of. It's like there's sometimes ways that the cross-chain messaging is constructed that a flaw can be introduced or found. Essentially. So there's cross-chain bridge hacks can happen in a variety of ways, but just because there's so many ways to go wrong, and there's so much at risk. You know, they support so many potential funds moving through that an attacker sees that as definitely a great opportunity. DeFi protocols themselves, they also have complexity. I think a big thing that impacted the industry was flash loans. So, you know, up till that point, it was usually like, oh, you have a bunch of code or something raw things that shouldn't. That's usually where they focused. Flash loans introduced a new kind of concept where people could essentially do almost like aggressive trading, influencing prices on the market with big amounts of liquidity all at once, and then using that to manipulate a DeFi protocol, is eventually allowing them to basically pull more money out than they technically should. So it's kind of a mix of technical hacking, but also like aggressive Wall Street trading, and that really changed the game in terms of how we had to think about security. Because you know, we're not really focused on financial risks, but we have to effectively to support our clients and work with other financial risk providers that already work with clients like Gauntlet or Chaos Labs or things like that. That kind of take that side of the work for some of these services. So it just made the game more complicated.
The fight was still. It's got so far to go. It can be a real flash.
I think so. Yeah, and I think what we've seen a lot of banks do now is experiment with stablecoin. We've seen, for example, BIS, Bank of International Settlements. They work with central banks, and they actually are experimenting with using DeFi or like a automated market maker like Uniswap. Exchange. They want to use that for like trading between CBDCs. They were doing that in a pilot program, and there's a report out about that. So I think what we're going to see is as DeFi kind of starts to mature in the open Ethereum Web3 space, we're going to see financial institutions pick out things that they think are useful, probably build more corporate controls around it and other things that make them comfortable. Probably open it up to only select parties. So there's going to be things built on that. But I do think that we're going to see that slowly get more adoption. And I think the Web3 space itself will also mature, and there's going to be a race between Web3 industries that are operating somewhat outside of the regulatory regime and more traditional institutions to adopt the technology, and they'll kind of compete to see who's going to be more established. And I hope they have both options.
So everyone's going to sell themselves.
So you see that, and if you figure you think that's going to make it that competition is talking about?
I think it will. I don't know. I mean, NFTs, I think, are a whole different ballgame, like luxury, loyalty point programs. I think are going to have some success there. I think certain collectibles. We've seen a lot of expensive brands like Nike. Adidas, like they're all now experimenting with this, and I think they have had success. I mean, I think some of it's been from hype in the industry, but I think long term, if people find something valuable enough to hold a collection for it, digitizing it makes a lot of sense in this day and age. So I think that will have success, and I think more, let's say, practical applications of NFTs will also
tokenization of certain
absolutely. Like I think with financial assets, and then also things like fun applications for getting access to an Airbnb, for example, if an NFT expires, or something like that. I think there's a lot, I mean, based on what we did with Toyota for supply chains, I think there's, I don't know if that's the best use case for it, but I definitely think there's a lot of applications to have digital representations of things that people want in some form or fashion, and having the ability to custody that digitally. The video game industry is one area where I definitely think there's going to be a lot of success.
Texas gamers continuously talking about the biggest game in Texas.
Yeah.
P2E operating now. Yeah, it's definitely stuff.
Yeah, we got, I think, 5 esports teams in the other or something like that. So yeah, and we've heard a little bit of experimentation with things like watching SCs. Obviously, our team is fan also has an esports team. So I think we'll definitely continue to see that being like one of the first initiatives. Because obviously, video games started. Yeah. And for people that want to play earlier, like, well, if you're playing video games, you want probably something that applies to the game, just like you want to.
You get that badge, right?
Yep.
And that's tokenized.
Yep.
And then you
and in-game economy is something we're already seeing create real value. And so I think it's only natural that we can see an extension of that in blockchain-based economies. And actually, one of our biggest clients at OpenZepplin is Sandbox. We've seen, obviously, they've had a lot of success. They have a very well-traded token. So working with their team, we've seen a lot of the ways in which, like, gamified NFTs, digital assets have become very popular the same way that traditional video games get popular, except people actually do have some public claim to whatever that asset is in a way that doesn't just rely essentially on the data that the company controls. It can be put on a public ledger.
Giving them some kind of monetary value to their work within the game, right?
And allowing them to pull that into a financial ecosystem that doesn't just have to rely on the video game developers themselves. It can be an open economy that can go beyond what even the video game company could, even if they were wanting to support it 100%. It goes beyond what even they could build in-house. It allows the ecosystem to take it and run.
We did it with Sweatcoin. You heard about Sweatcoin?
I have.
So it's like you work out and stuff like that, and you got tokens.
That's right. Yes.
Stuff like that. So we got business, like I said, me and Aaron playing around for a little while. That's private. Market down. Another thing that's like so interesting, that's physical products. So things are kind of back on the rise.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the trick is that, like, blockchain is not a replacement for, say, like, everything else is needed to run a successful business or product. But it can be a very useful tool, among others, to make it successful. And, as always, people chime in with value when they try to make a token and then they build a thing after. And we've seen that happen quite a bit. But I'm hoping that after bear market, the fat cut a bit, and we can now start to see projects that survive really focus on core use cases that drive value without venture funding around it.
Everybody and mother was making tokens.
Yep.
Seeing that ICOs were coming about right in the center.
Yeah, and a lot of the clients we work with have been building no matter what, continuing to work with us no matter what, because we continue to care about security no matter what the market looks like. We've seen them, continue to make success. Every time it comes to the next bull cycle, they're in a position to do bigger and better.
Man, I could sit here and talk to you all day. Stuff is really great, really interesting stuff. So, that being said, I guess we can wrap it up there. I know we gotta get on stage today. So Michael will be on the main stage at 2:30 today at the North American Blockchain Summit. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.